Okay. This is now part number 3 of the series of all the sources from Chazal on Sisif. Yesterday we looked at the Sifrei, which is the primary midrash halacha on Sifrei Bemidbar that comes from the school of Rabbi Yishmael. And what we saw was, first of all, a couple of interesting topics. So the concept of Sisif being obligated for a Kasuth Yom and not for a Kasuth Laila. And related to that, the concept that women are exempt from Sisif on the grounds that it's a Miswath Aseh She'azaman Garama. And we also saw the basic architecture of the drashot that Chazal use to establish the basic shape of the Sisif, that it has a gadil that comes out from the garment, and then out from the garment come out Sisif, that it shouldn't be right on the edge of the garment or right on the corner of the garment. It shouldn't simply protrude from the garment, in the sense it shouldn't be you shouldn't make it in the process of making the garment from the threads of the garment itself, but rather it should be sewn into the garment. Those are the most important things we learned. And also that it applies specifically to a garment with 4 corners, and according to the opinion of the Sifrei, not with 5, 6, or 7 corners. We're going to finish today the Sifrei. Now, the truth is, there's not that much halachic material in the rest of the Sifrei on this parsha of Sisif from Sifrei Bemidbar, parsha Shalach Lecha. But what there is, a lot of it's not really about Sisif, it's about other issues, as we'll see. Nevertheless, I want to cover the whole thing before we move on in the next shiur to Sifrei Zuta, which we'll discuss what that is. All right. Ureithem otho uzchatem ethkol miswath Hashem wa'asithem otham. You will see it. You will remember all the miswath Hashem, and you will do them. Says the Sifrei, Zo Parashat Shema. This refers to Parashat Shema. Ata omer Zo Parashat Shema o eno ela Parashat V'haya im Shemoah. Maybe it refers to the second parsha, not the first parsha. Amrath se ura'eh. Ezohi parasha sheyesh ba kibul malchus. So this pasuk from Parashat Sisif says you will see it, and you will remember all the mitzvot of Hashem, and you will do them. And then it goes on, the part that's not it wasn't directly quoted, it talks about so that it has 2 things in it: the denial or the forbidding avodah zarah, and accepting malchus shemayim. And so therefore, what does that correspond to? That corresponds to the first parasha Shema. The Sifrei goes on, Tikdam parashat Shema leparashat V'haya im Shemoah, or Tikdam parashat V'haya im Shemoah leparashat Shema. So it first of all states the halakha that we all know, that you say the first parsha of Shema before you say the second parsha of Shema. And he says, well, maybe it's the other way around. Amrath Tikdam parasha sheyesh ba kibul malchus shemayim u'mi'et ba avodah zarah leparashat V'haya im Shemoah she'ena ela lelamed. The main topic of the second paragraph of Shema, as understood by the Sifrei, is teaching. And the first paragraph, however, is the fundamentals of Judaism, of accepting HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our master and forbidding the worship of any other gods. So therefore, that one should go first. Similar to what we saw in the Mishnah, of you accept Al Malchus Shemayim first, and then you accept Al Miswath. Tikdam parashat Sisif leparashat V'haya im Shemoah. Well, maybe then what we call the third paragraph of Shema should actually come second. It should come before V'haya im Shemoah. Amrath Tikdam parashat shehi nohegeth bayom uvalayla leparashat Sisif she'ena nohegeth ela bayom. Exactly the same as the Mishnah said, and even more explicit, leaving no room for doubt. That what it means is you only say parashat Sisif once a day during the Shema of the morning. And therefore, because for Hayim Shema is in both Shema of the morning and Shema of the evening, and therefore it's kind of more essential to the Shema, that one goes before. O yehe kore shalosh be'erev, kederek shekore shalosh b'shachar. Tamaloma ure'isa motho b'yom u'lo v'layla. Maybe you might think, well, you say that the Parsha of Sisif comes last because it's only said half of the time you say Shema. Well, maybe just say it both times you say Shema. Both times you should say three paragraphs, as is Minag Bava, as is the Minag Hayadua V'Kayam Yom Hazeh. So what does it say? Well, it's not appropriate. Why? Because it says Ura Ithem Otho, you shall see it. You shall see the Sisif. And at night you can't see Sisif, so it's not appropriate to say that Parsha. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai omer tikdom parashat Shema shehi lilmod. The parashat V'haya im Shemoah she'ena ela lelamed. Tikdom parashat V'haya im Shemoah shehi lelamed. The parashat Sisif she'ena ela la'asoth. So as Rabbi Shimon understands, you have a neutral regression. First paragraph is about learning. Second paragraph is about teaching, and the third paragraph is about doing. It has a specific practical example of a mitzvah you do, which is sisith. And therefore, that's how you should read the parshas. Learn, teach, do. Sha'al kach nitna Torah le'omod u'lelamed lishmor v'la'asoth. That's how you should do things. First you learn, then you teach, then you keep, and then you do. Ure'ithem otho u'zachatem et kol mitzvot Hashem u'asitham atham. We quote the pasuk. Magid hakasuf shekol makayim mitzvot sisith ma'alem ala ke'ilu kayim kiyam kol mitzvot kulan. The fact that the pasuk says Ure'ithem otho u'zachatem et kol mitzvot Hashem, you shall see it, i.e. sisith, and you should remember all of the mitzvot Hashem, teaches you, and this is very famous, this is brought down in Rashi, it teaches you that sisith are keneged all of the mitzvot in the Torah. Now, usually that's taken as a springboard to understand what is it about sisith that's unique, that makes it different from other mitzvot, that it should be considered keneged kol mitzvot Torah, kol Torah kula, or kol mitzvot kula. But the Sifrei kind of takes it in a completely different direction, and it says as follows: "V'harei devarim kol v'chomer uma im hamakayim mitzvot sisith ma'alim ala ke'elukiyim kol mitzvot kulan." Or just kol mitzvot, it says it. Kol v'chomer lechol mitzvot shebatorah. Kol v'chomer for other mitzvot. So, when the Torah, as understood by Sifrei, when the Torah is deliberately makish sisith to call all the mitzvot, it's not actually to teach you something specifically about sisith. It's to teach you something about all mitzvot. Basically, whenever you keep a mitzvah and you do it with the right intention, right kavana, with a properly taking on to understand that you're doing it because it's the son of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore you're going to do it properly, not how you might subjectively want to do it, but how objectively it's supposed to be done. It's as if you keep all the mitzvot, because it's kind of each act of doing a mitzvah is kibbul al shemayim in the fullest sense, and therefore keeping one is in a sense like keeping all of them. And how do we know? Because even something like sisith, that's is a kind of, we might say, relatively easy, relatively mundane. It doesn't really challenge your Yetzer Hara that much. Very few people have a big Yetzer Hara to wear a four-corner garment that doesn't have sisith on it. Kol v'chomer that it goes to mitzvot in the Torah that may be more difficult to keep, that require more energy to keep, require more dedication to keep, etc. Similar to the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Chulin that talks about the mitzvah of Shluach Haken, where the Torah says "L'ma'an yitav lecha v'arachtu yamim," something like that. The Torah says that you will you'll have long days if you keep the mitzvah of Shluach Haken. And again, one approach is, well, what is it exactly about Shluach Haken that should lead to elongating your life? And the Mishnah actually says no. If it applies to Shluach Haken, kol v'chomer to other mitzvot that are harder to keep, that in a particular case that require more money, more investment of your time, of your resources, etc. Okay, so that's what the Sifrei had to say there. We see again from this that there's a very close connection between the concept of sisith and the concept of Kriya Shema, or more particularly, there's a very close connection between the concept of Kriya Shema and the concept of the morning and Sisif. And we learn out some of the halachot, or at least midrashically, we learn out some of the halachot Kriya Shema from the part of the Torah that talks about Sisif. The Sifrei continues, you should not go spying after your heart. Zo minuth. This refers to heresy. Minuth is not same as kafira. Kafira would be, I don't believe in anything, I think it's all fake. Minuth would be, I believe this is real, but I deny Torah Shabbat Peh, I want to be a Karaite, or I don't know, I'm like deny Sefer Devarim, the rest of it's fine, etc. Views that are kind of Jewish, from even you could say, but violate the basic boundaries of normative Jewish belief. Ke'inyan shene'ema umose anima mimaveth et ha'isha asher hi masudim v'charamim liba asurim yadeh. So it's a pasuk from Koheleth, which is on a literal level talking about a woman, but the woman is taken, as it is often in droshot about Mishlei, taken to be kind of the temptress. And what is the temptress? The temptress is heresy. And it's very, very true that heresy is something that people find very, very tempting. All sorts of beliefs that objectively, when you sit down to think about them, are just really quite ridiculous and absurd. And you think, why on earth, if you want to break the Torah, why not just watch a movie on Shabbos or something? Why would you decide to a Rav who lived in America, who's now dead, is not dead, and actually he's God, and you should pray to him, and like the Kiddush is his blood and body. Why would you even think such a thing? Why is that attractive to people? But we see empirically with our own eyes that people really, really enjoy minut. It's has a big koach, similar to attractive woman who's forbidden to you. And so that's the pasuk. And it continues, now, I looked at the commentary on this. As I mentioned last time, I'm using the Horowitz edition. It's much better to use the edition that was more recently put out by Menachem Kahana, which, it's based on 100 years of additional scholarship. It's possible when I look at that edition, which I ordered yesterday, that I'll be able to explain that better. But Horowitz basically says it's not really explainable. Okay. And after your eyes. Zo zenuth. This is whoredom. So whereas Acharei levavchem refers to the metaphorical whoredom of heresy and weird religious cults and stuff, this refers to literal whoredom. Shiksas. Ke'inyan shene'amar vayomer Shimshon otha kachli kihi yeshara be'enai. She is nice in what? She is nice in my eyes. And it's quite self-evident. You don't even really need a pasuk to prove you. Why do people, have relations with women that they shouldn't have? Because they see what they see, and they're unable to control themselves. Asher atem zonim acharehem. Continues that you go a whoring after. What does that mean? Zo avodah zarah. This is avodah zarah. Ke'inyan, which, by the way, notice is distinct from minut. It's possible to be a min and not commit avodah zarah. It's possible to be avodah zarah and not be a min. Well, the second one might not be true, but certainly the first way around is true. And that pasuk is true, but there are many, many pasukim in the Torah that make the same analogy between whoredom and going after idol worship. Rabbi Nathan omer shelo yehe shofeh b'koso u'mishtamesh b'koso shel chaveiro. You shouldn't use your own cup and also use your neighbor's cup. Obviously, being a euphemism for wife. Davar acher, v'lo tathuru achar levavchem acharei einechem. You shouldn't go after your heart and after your eyes. Magid she'einayim holchos achar halev. Eyes go after the heart. Okay, interesting claim. Sifrei challenges it, or halev achar einayim. Maybe it's the other way around. The heart goes after the eyes, which you might think because you see something and then your heart desires it. Amras, very interesting argument. V'halo yesh suma she'oseh kol ta'avoth sheba'olam. Is it not the case that you have blind people that eat treif and other averas, even though obviously they can't see? We see from this what the fact that blind people can commit averas shows you that it's the heart is primary and the eyes are secondary. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, "V'lo tasuru achar levavchem achar einechem, lama ne'ema lefi shu omer, samach bachu beyadutecha, v'halach b'dache libacha." Probably libacha. Libacha. So you have a pasuk from Koheleth that says, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and go after the ways of your heart." And the Sifrei asks, "B'derech yeshara." Or baderech shetitzah, what does it actually mean? Does it mean literally, make hay while you're young, or other kind of phrases to that effect that we have in English? Or does it mean no, go in the right way? Don't go after your heart. So this pasuk, you can't. It'd be a bit of a stretch to say this pasuk was taught on Har Sinai for this, the central purpose of avoiding a possibly erroneous interpretation of Sefer Kohelet when it was, written and distributed many, many hundreds of years later. But nevertheless, what we do see here is a kind of general point, which is important and basic to Judaism, which is that some texts are more primary and some texts are more secondary. And therefore, if you have something in Kohelet, that you have a way of reading it that's reasonable and another way of reading it that's reasonable, but one fits in with what the Torah has already told you, and one doesn't so much fit what the Torah has already told you, you pick the first one. Sifrei goes on. Lama'un tizkuru wa'asith, so that you should remember and do. La'asof zichron kama'aseh. Short comment that zikron and asiyah, remembering and doing, are juxtaposed closely in the text. And so therefore, remembering has a certain merit, a certain zechus, as actually doing the mitzvot does. V'chithem kodoshim lelohechem, and you shall be holy to your God. Zo kedushas kol mitzvot. This refers to the holiness of keeping all the mitzvot. Ata omer zo kedushas kol mitzvot, or eno elo kedushas tzith. How do you know? Maybe it's talking about what the paragraph was already talking about, which is the kedusha, the sanctity of tzith. Amotza bamer inya medaber b'kedushas kol mitzvot. Well, look at the pasuk itself. So it was basically the paragraph was talking about specifically, but it's moved on to a general concept of lama and etc. We're talking now about all the mitzvot. Okay. Rabbi Omer Zokadusha Sisith Thata Omer Zokadusha Sisith. He says no. You have to kind of read the whole paragraph as one thing. Ata Omer Zokadusha Sisith or Eno Ela Kedushas Kol HaMitzvot. So it challenges the other way. Well, maybe it's talking about Kedushas Kol HaMitzvot, just like the first opinion. Kashu Omer Kedoshim Tehyu. You have another pasuk in a completely different part of the Torah that already said Kedoshim Tehu. That's talking about the kedusha of keeping all the mitzvot. Amura. So what's it saying here when it says, and you shall be holy to your God? So kedusha sisith. This is kedusha sisith. Magid, which teaches shasisith mosefeth kedusha l'Yisrael. It's an important thing to wear sisith. It's a beautiful mitzvah to have, because sisith add kedusha to Am Yisrael. Now, there's plenty you could say there about the different interpretive techniques used by the Tanna Kama and Rabbi about what is the relevant context for understanding a pasuk, and do you look at the kind of the immediate context of the paragraph, or do you look at, or do you, and to what extent, and how do you bring in pasukim from other, literally other books of the Torah? But it's not really our topic. So Ani Hashem Elokechem. Asher hosethi athram eretz Mitzrayim. I'm Hashem your God that brought you out of Egypt. V'chima inyan Yosiath Mitzrayim lekan. What is the relevance specifically of Yosiath Mitzrayim to Sisif? Ella. Now here, so we're going to learn something that is kind of a little bit relevant to halacha. Shelo yomar hare ani noten siv'onim wa kala ilan v'hem domim b'thecheleth u'mi motir alai begelui. Well, techeleth is expensive. So maybe I'll just get some blue dye or some reds in a techeleth or whatever, and I'll put it on my sisif, and who will know? Therefore it says, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem your God. Du'u ma'asiti lahem lemisrim, shahayu ma'asehem b'sefa, u'pesamtim b'galui. The Egyptians did bad things in secret, and I publicized it to everyone. V'harei davarim kol v'chomer, u'ma imidat boranuth, m'mu'eteth, ha'oseh b'sefa, ha'makom ha'fasamo b'galui kol v'chomer, l'midat atov b'meruba. There's a general principle that Hashem has the way of things is that people do bad things and people do good things. So Hashem has to have a midah of puranuf, of punishment, and a midah of reward. But his midah of reward, he rewards people more than he punishes them. So we see that he punishes up until the third and the fourth generation, famously from Yiseret Tebrot, but he rewards up until the 1000th generation. And so here, just as if the Egyptians sinned in private, and they were punished in public, so one who does a mitzvah in secret, i.e. in this case, the secret is that no one except you will know whether it's real legitimate techeleth or not, you will be rewarded in public. Okay, that's a nice drasha. But here's something interesting. What does it say? It says, I'll put siv'onim, literally dyes, and kala ilan. Now, kala ilan is famously the fake techeleth. And kala ilan, we know beyond reasonable doubt, is indigo. And the historical point is that an earlier period of Am Yisrael's history, the closest thing you would have been able to come up with techeleth is woad. But woad is much harder to dye clothes with it, and what you end up with is a much paler, much weaker dye, and one that's much less fast, and therefore no reasonable person would, no kind of moderately intelligent or just kind of has decent eyesight person would confuse a piece of cloth that was dyed with woad, or more pertinently a patil that was dyed with woad, with one that was dyed with techeleth. However, around about the time of Chazal, they started in an advanced way of dyeing indigo, which came originally from China, started becoming prevalent in the region. And basically, you could make out of kala ilan something that looked very similar to techeleth. The Gemara, as we'll see, discusses that if you do all sorts of extreme things and soak it in urine for many days, you can tell the difference. But the Bekitzer, at the kind of first sight and just at a market stall, people won't tell the difference. And if you take kala ilan and go into shul with it, people won't know the difference. So this big issue arose of basically people can save themselves a lot of money by pretending to do the mitzvah. And this is a kind of a big test of, why do you do mitzvahs in the first place? Is it because you want to fit in with some kind of social system and be publicly accepted? Or is it because you really believe that this is a mitzvah from Kadosh Baruch Hu? And whether to spend the extra, in our money, £60, 200 shekel or whatever, on the tzitzit or not, on the techeleth versus the kala ilan is a kind of big test. And when that test is put in front of you, as the drasha says, you have to understand that you can get away with it as far as other people are concerned, but you can't get away with it as far as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is concerned, which is something that is on a logical level very obvious, but is something that's very hard for us to kind of sink into our psychology. As the Gemara says, when Rabbi Eliezer was on his deathbed, he says, may you have fear of heaven like you fear other people. And they say, well, only so much? Halavai, so you should so much. Halavai, that you should be as embarrassed before HaKadosh Baruch Hu as you are embarrassed in front of your neighbors. A message that is relevant to all of us at all times and in all ages. But what does it say here? It doesn't say, I'll put kala ilan. It says sivonim for kala ilan. Now, why might that be significant? we have this idea that's very prevalent that color ilan and techelet are the same color, visibly the same color. And therefore, we know that techelet is the same color as color ilan, and we know that color ilan is indigo, so therefore techelet is indigo. And when snails, when the snails that produces these dyes were discovered by a goy about 300 or 400 years ago, and they, Gentile researchers realized that these were the same dyes that they read about in Roman sources and in other kind of classical sources, which were regarded as the highest quality dyes and very expensive and stuff. It did obviously occur to some people that this is probably not a coincidence that the ancient peoples who lived in the same rough region as Am Yisrael at the same time as Am Yisrael, they had these dyes that suddenly that came from a sea creature that suddenly became lost, and now we've rediscovered them. And the Jews had this dye that came from a sea creature and it became lost. It's logical that this is the same thing, but it was rejected. Why was it rejected? Because they only made they could only make a purple dye out of these sea creatures, out of these snails. And Rav Herzog, the chief rabbi of Israel, who famously produced this big PhD thesis, he was Nasip on the issue. He basically said this fits this snail, the Murex trunculus, fits every description. It seems to be right, but it doesn't make the right color. And eventually he abandoned the Murex trunculus and he decided on this, what's it called, Jacintha or something snail, which doesn't work because it doesn't make any kind of dye. And then the story goes, and it's like a lovely story that these scientists were in a lab, and one of them put the cup down on the window, and the sun was shining through the window, and it was exactly the right point in the development of this dye. And he goes and eats his sandwich, and he comes back, and boom, it's not purple anymore, it's blue. And the Masorah has been validated, and we see that Judaism and science go together, and it's a beautiful message of modern orthodoxy, and it's all very nice. However, Ephraim Veyman wrote a series of articles which you can find on Torah Musings, which used to be hihurim.com, where he argues quite strongly and quite convincingly, and the responses to him are not convincing at all, that actually the techelet should be understood not as blue, literally the same as color elan, but as a bluey kind of purple, something basically similar to what they'd been making, what the scientists had been already able to make. And he even argues that basically the kind of blues that we make out of techelet today, out of these snails today, weren't really possible using the methods they had today. So their techelet would have been a kind of a dark blue with quite a lot of purple in it. In which case, it's not a beautiful story about how science and modern and tradition go together, etc. It's a rather sad and depressing story of that we probably could have been rediscovered techelet 200 or 300 years ago, but because of our misunderstanding of our tradition, we didn't. And even today, we're kind of wearing a color that probably we don't see with, I wear it myself, but it would be better and more authentic if we were wearing something that was a darker blue with some purple in it. And one of the things that Ephraim Veyman points out is a very simple thing, is it doesn't say, I'll take color elan, as you will see if you look in your Rashi, which is what most people kind of think of when they think of it. It doesn't, which brings us in Rashi. It doesn't say, I'll bring color elan, I'll pretend it's techelet. It says, I'll bring color elan and sivonim. What are the sivonim? It says the sivonim is some kind of red dye. So when they wanted to make fake techelet, they took color elan, indigo. It's like a bit of red in it. It comes out a nice purple, or a dark blue with a lot of purple in it, or a heavily blue purple, something like that. And if anyone wants my opinion, my view is that of all the kind of techelet strings that are available, you should try and aim for the very darkest one you can find, not the kind of sky blue that people think is ideal, because they know that in modern Hebrew, techelet means sky blue, and therefore it should be sky blue. In as much as there is variation, there's less variation now than there was when I started buying techelet 6 or 7 years ago. The darker blue ones are better, but what would be even better is if they made one with a bit of purple in it, which they're perfectly technically capable of doing. And in fact, it might even be slightly easier than what they're doing, but they don't want to because they want to hang on to this nice, neat story of the cup on the window, which magically turned blue and surprised all the scientists, and they discovered that the Mesorah was right after all, which, by the way, doesn't really sound hugely plausible, like that, such a thing really happened. Okay, we move on. Now, we've been asking up until now, what's the connection between Sisyph and Yosef Mitzrayim? But it asks a different question, which is, well, it's not just Sisyph, it's also about Yosef Mitzrayim. It's always talking about Yosef Mitzrayim. So, son of his friend got taken captive. And when he redeemed him, he said, well, sorry, you were a captive, and now I've redeemed you. And I didn't redeem you to be a free agent. I redeemed you to be, my servant. And then going forward, if he says, okay, well, do X, and he says, well, why should I? I'm a free man. It's not in the Constitution. He says, wait a second, you're my servant. כיוון שנכנס למדינה אמר לו, נעול לי סנדלי וטול לפני כלים, להוליך לבפניך, הסקל הבן ההוא מנסה. So he comes back to Medina, and the king says to him, tie my shoes and, get my towels and stuff, because we're going to the wash house. And the son is like, no, wait. He says, I got a document right here. It says you're my servant. Amalo aggadata. You're my servant. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed the seed of Abraham, who he loved, he didn't redeem them to be free agents. He redeemed them to be slaves to him. And every time he should make a gezerah on Am Yisrael, and they say, sorry, we have freedom of choice, we're libertarians, he says to them, you're my servants. What are you talking about? When they went out to the Midbar, he started giving them some easy mitzvahs, some hard mitzvahs. כגון Shabbath, Wa'arayos, Sisith, Utefillin. Shabbath, the forbidden unions, conjugal unions, Sisith and Tefillin. Hiskilu Yisrael Yoth Menatkim. And Am Yisrael were like, no, it's too much. Amar lehem avadayatem, you're my servants. Almanath kem padithiathem, almanath sheya gozer watem mekayamin. So the basic point there is that whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu talks about, in the Torah it says, the point is, therefore, you must do what I say, whether you like it or not. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I'm Hashem your God. Od lama ne'ema, v'halo kava ne'ema, ani Hashem Elokeichem. In the pasuk, it says ani Hashem Elokeichem at the end of the conclusion of the paragraph, and then again at the end of the beginning of the last pasuk and the end of the last pasuk. Why? It's already said it. Why does it say Ani Hashem Elokeichem again? It's a very interesting midrash. Because all this is to avoid possible claim, which is Am Yisrael will say, okay, you gave us the Torah. Why did you give us the Torah? So we'll keep it and get a reward. Okay, but we don't want the reward. We're fine, thanks. Let's just agree to disagree, and you can keep the reward, and we'll keep our freedom. Ke'inyan sha'amru Yisrael Yechezkel, as Am Yisrael said to Yechezkel, Shnema, Yasu Elai Anashim Eziknei Yisrael Ve'yeshvu Lefanai. This is an interesting parak in Yechezkel, parak 20, that people came to visit him. And then what comes now is no longer a quote from Yechezkel, it's kind of an interpretive thing. Amru lo Yechezkel, Eved shemachara rabo lo yasa mirashutho. Is it not the case that if you're an Eved to someone and he sells you, he's no longer your master? That's how it works. Amar lahem, hen, of course. Amru lo ho'el umachanu mecharanu amakom le'umatha alam yasani mereshutha. Since we've gone into Galuth, our temple's destroyed, our state is destroyed, he's abandoned us, he's sold us into the hands of the Goyim. And therefore, okay, things are bad, the Goyim are ruling over us, we're persecuted, things are terrible, but on the plus side, we kind of don't have to keep the Torah in. Amalahem hare eved shemachara rabo amanaf lachzo shema yaseh. He says, well, yes, it's true that you can sell someone, but you can also sell a slave on the kind of condition that eventually he's going to come back and be your servant. And now it's quoting again directly from Yechezkel. Waha'olah al ruchachem hayat lo tichye. Asher atem omrim nihye kegoyim asher sevivothenu uchamishpachos ha'adama l'sharif es va'even chai ani ne'um mashem im lo b'yad chazaka v'zro natuya v'chem ma'shefucha em lo chalechem. The pasuk says basically, if you think now you get to be goyim, do avodah zarah like everyone else, just because you've gone into galut, no way. As I liveth, with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm and with great wrath, I will rule over you. Biyad chazaka, everyone will recognize the words that are coming. Zoha deva, this is deva. Kamashinema, hine yat Hashem hoya b'miknacha asher b'sadeh. With a strong hand, this is the plague, as it says, the hand of Hashem is on your cattle in the field. With Israel natuya zoha cherev, and with an outstretched arm, this is a sword. Kamashinema v'chaba shlufa biyado natuya Yerushalayim. V'chem hashefucha zoha rav. Great wrath means famine. So there's three things. There's sword, plague, and famine. Basically, the three ways that things can get really bad. Obviously, that's from the Haggadah, and obviously these are not directly talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim at all. They're talking about 400 years removed, the first Galuth, and why and what exactly is going on there. I refer you to my work on Haggadah, which explains that kind of the question is like moot because it's not what it means in the first place. So it goes on Sifrei. I'm going to give you famine. I'm going to give you sword. I'm going to give you a plague. And then I'm still going to be a Kadosh Baruch Hu. I'm still going to be your special God. You're still going to be obligated to keep my laws. Not your typical feel-good midrash, but that's what it says. So Hani Hashem Lokechem twice basically means I'm Hashem your God when I took you out of Egypt. I'm still Hashem your God when I put you into Galut and take you back again. Rabbi Nathan Omer En Lachal Kol Mitzvah Shebathorah She'en Matan Sachara B'Tzida. Whenever you get a mitzvah in the Torah, it also says its reward. Say ulamad mitzvah Tzitzit. Go learn from mitzvah Tzitzit. Ma'aseh ba'adam echad shah. Well, and now we're going to go off. We're not really going to talk about what Tzitzit said. A little alone what to prove the point that every mitzvah has its reward written next to it. But we'll read on anyway. Ma'aseh ba'adam echad shahaya zahir b'mitzvah Tzitzit. There was one guy. He, as we're going to see, he was a bit thin. His Yiddish guy was not tov, but he was very firm about Tzitzit. Shama sheyesh zona b'karach. He heard that there was a prostitute over on some coastal town, Tel Aviv. And that she took 400 gold talents or whatever as her thing. He paid this very big fee and he fixed the time. He came and sat at the gate of her house. Must be a nice house if that was what she was earning. Niknasa shepascha wa'amra la otha ha'ish. I guess it should be wa'amra la otha ha'ish. Shekavata lo zaman. Harehu yoshev al pesach habayis. Oh, sorry. Nichnas ha-shifka wa'amra. Ha-shifka came in And she told him, that guy that you fixed the big fee with, he's sitting outside the house. Amra la yikanes. You should come in. Kirwan shenichnas siya lo sheva metoth shel kesef v'achas shel zahav. When she came in, she laid out for him 7 beds of silver and 1 bed of gold. It doesn't sound hugely comfortable, but I guess does demonstrate great wealth. והיא הייתה בעליונה. ובין כל אחת ואחת ספסלים של כסף, and between all the beds there were benches of silver. והעליון של זהב, and the highest one of gold. כיוון שהגיעו לאותו מעשה, and just as they were about to commence, באו 4 סיסיותיו ונדמו לו כ4 עדים וטפקו לו על פניו. His 4 sisters that he was wearing on whatever garment he was wearing hit him in the face. Miyad nishmat, and I can't do this. Uyashav lo al gabe karka, and he sat on the ground. Alfi nishmata uyashav al gabe karka, and she also was kind of shocked, and she sat on the ground. Amra lo, she said to him, Gafa shel Romi, which is some sort of, which means patron melech. It means I don't know why she's calling him patron melech. It means kind of servant of the king. You know, if you're going to behave in such a bizarre fashion, you at least don't go home until you explain, you know, what exactly is wrong after you've laid out all that cash. Amala ha'avodah. Ha'avodah is a kind of way of saying, you know, by heaven, basically without mentioning, you know, a name of Hashem or a divine name, saying you swear by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo ra'isi b'cham b'chmu. There's nothing wrong with you. She'en kiyafyech b'chol ha'olam. You're the most beautiful woman in the world. Ela miswaka la'asiv ani Hashem Elokeinu v'chasa ba'ani Hashem Elokechem, ani Hashem Elokechem shtei panim. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us this mitzvah of Tzitzit, and it says by it 2 times, ani Hashem Elokechem. Ani Hashem Elokechem, ani asid. I'm Hashem Elokechem, who gives you reward if you do the right thing, and I am Hashem Elokechem, who punishes you when you do the wrong thing. Amra lo ha'avodah. She said to him, she also swore by heaven, Eni manichasecha ad shetichtov li shimcha, b'shem erecha, b'shem midrashecha, she'ata lamed bo Torah, or lamed bo Torah, ulai. By heaven, I'm not going to let you go until you write me your name, the city that you live, and the place that you learn Torah. V'kasav lashemo v'shem ero v'shem rabo v'shem midrasho shalama bo Torah. He wrote who he is, where he lives, who his rab is, where he learns. Amda ubizbeza et kol mamona shalish l'malchuth, shalish la'aniyim, u'shalish na'la ima, u'vatha wa'amda b'veit midrasho shel Rabbi Chia. And she said, all my ill-gotten gains, a third I'll pay in taxes, a third I'll give to the poor, and a third she took with her, and she came to the Bet Midrash of Rabbi Chia. Amra lo, Rabbi, Gayaveni, I want to convert. Amar la, Shema einecha nasata bechad min hatamidim. He says, well, you know, it's a bit weird, a bit suspicious. Why do you want to convert? Maybe you want to get married to one of the bochrim, which is not really a proper reason to convert. She brought out a letter, this thing that she wrote that she had in her hand. Amar lo amod zache b'mikchecha. Othan hamitzaot shehitzia lecha be'isur tatzia lecha beheter. Ze mitzan sachara ba'olam hazeh v'olam haba eini yodea ka'am. So the conclusion of the story is that surprisingly enough, he gets the cash and he gets the girl, and because she's now a good Yiddish maidel, and I guess all the things are quite clean with the gift. And there you go. Where's Sisith? It might help you out of a sticky spot one day. All right, that concludes the Sifrei. As I said at the beginning, mostly agadic material, not hugely relevant for understanding the mitzvah of Tzitzit, which is kind of the theme of this whole thing. I just wanted to cover all of it anyway. And tomorrow we're going to go on to Sifrei Zutta, explain what Sifrei Zutta is tomorrow, which is going to be much shorter and much more focused. And I say tomorrow, it's not going to be tomorrow, it's going to be next week. Have a wonderful Shavuos.